excited to have Jeremy on today and to talk about his training methodology, his brands, his patents, his shed training patents starting in 2009. And he has training videos. He has a YouTube channel, and we've watched a lot of his videos, and we've watched his stuff on some very specific training videos, especially when we talked earlier about force fetch and things like that, which we'll get into.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, there's the short end of our techiness, trying to get it recorded on multiple things. But no, I really appreciate you doing this with us. It's an honor to have the opportunity to talk with you guys. Hopefully, share some information on to your followers as well. We are a follower of yours as well, and enjoy your page. So. Yeah, just a little bit of background. So we are from Pulaski, Wisconsin, which is near Green Bay. Shed training product line is what got us started. It's a brand that we had named DogBone. My background with retrievers is deep with Goldens. My parents always had Goldens. I was raised with Goldens. Soft spot in my heart for them, and they had a small kennel, and so we always had them, but we weren't they weren't real hardcore hunting dogs or anything. They were family dogs first, for sure. And then my dad did some pheasant hunting with them, and I got to tag along on some of those trips when I was younger. And so we were talking a little bit about it earlier. Like if it weren't for dogs, I wouldn't hunt birds. Like I love eating them. I love shooting them. I don't love them to the point that I would do it if I didn't have a retriever. And so to me, that's the part that puts it all together and makes it worthwhile for me. And the deer stuff for me started because I'm from Wisconsin, and up here, the deer hunting culture is really strong. And I was raised a deer hunter. My whole everybody does up here, and I was real passionate about it. And when I went to college, I met a bunch of buddies that were from Minnesota. I went to school on the Minnesota border, and they were all big duck hunters. And I got into duck hunting, and that's when I got my first Labrador. And it was 1999 I got my first lab, and I fell in love with the idea again of using the dogs and enjoying the dogs as part of the hunt. And I didn't have that. I didn't get that with deer. It just wasn't a place to use them. And several years later, I missed the idea of being really, a person only has so much time. And if you're going to do stuff right, it takes time. And if you're going to bird hunt, it's a lot of time and scouting. And if you're a deer hunter, it's a lot of scouting and time as well. And I physically didn't have enough time to do both and do both well. So I decided, I wanted to go back into more passionately pursuing deer and the idea of using a dog to shed hunt. I shed hunted for years without dogs, rather unsuccessfully. And
It'd be typical, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And this is back in the day when shed hunting really wasn't even that popular. It was you'd talk about shed hunting to someone and they weren't sure what it was. They weren't exactly sure what you were even doing. So by bringing the dogs into it, it allowed me that excuse of another reason to go, another reason to figure out how to use the dogs to benefit me, but also to enjoy it more. So that was kind of our transition. And then in more recent years, we then went to using the dogs for game recovery. We've got a full line of products that we do for game recovery tracking products. And so that was a real logical next step. If you're going to have a dog that shed hunts for you in the spring, use them in the fall for tracking. But I think as hunters we go through lots of cycles, and one of the things that I transitioned back into was the birds in probably the last five years or so, maybe 5 to 10 years. I've gotten back into it, and so now we're using, and the beauty of it is we're using the same dogs to do just about all of it, and enjoying it all a lot more.
Well, what I wanted to start with when we're talking about shed hunting is one of the things you mentioned when we were talking before the program started is that the similarities in dogs who upland hunt to shed hunting skills.
Sure. Yeah.
Because you said you started with pheasants, right?
Yeah.
And then that segued over into your shed hunting?
Right. I think
because of the parallels in those skill sets.
Yeah, I think a lot of times that shed hunting itself is something that a lot of people I think are intimidated by. I think it's a little bit it's this idea of it's a specialty thing. It's a real niche thing, and it is to a degree, but so is upland, and so is gun dog work or waterfalling. So is detection dogs. So is cadaver dogs. Like it's all very very specific and narrowed down to meet what we're looking for as a handler, our needs. But what I think is overlooked is the idea that, and this is not to discount the idea of those specialty things, but the idea is of what does it take in order to do those things. When we think about it, it's natural game finding. It's a dog with a good nose. It's a dog that has a desire to want to please us and make us happy, do the things that we want them to do. So when you look at what it takes in order to do those things, and then you look at on top of that, most of these dogs that we're using these days are the word versatile is a real buzzword, because there's the NAVDA group, and I feel like we like to place everybody in groups, and we like to start groups on Facebook and Instagram and all that. So everybody likes to be a part of a group, and that's fine. But I think what we need to understand is that those groups are like formally drawn up things for us. But the idea of a versatile dog, the definition of versatile is being able to do multiple things and do them well. And I think that the Labrador should fall into that group just the same as the Drottar, and just the same as any of these other breeds. So I look at that skill set is there, and we just shape it and customize it to exactly what works for us best and works for us well. So, the similarities between an upland dog and a shed dog are much closer than, let's say, a pheasant dog and a duck dog, because you look at the things that's necessary for them in order to do what you want them to do. A dog that's a gun dog, we need them to be steady. We need that marking ability, lining ability, handling ability, all of those things that transfer to the field really well. When you look at an upland dog, we look at range and nice quarter and cast and working, game finding ability. But the difference, when you look at that upland dog and then you look at the shed dog, what does the shed dog do? Range, quartering and casting, the natural game finding. Instead of flushing, they just pick up and retrieve. Well, the flusher retrieves eventually. It's just we have to shoot the thing first. So there's a lot of overlapping parallels there when you start talking about the pheasant dog or the upland dog, let's say, and then the shed dog.
I wouldn't even know where to begin with taking my dog shed hunting.
Sure.
Like, I wouldn't even know the first step. What? This is going a little bit off of what we talked about, but I'm thinking to myself, what would be the initial skill? Let's say I wanted to go and I have a pup. I wanted to start with this. What would be the initial skill besides obedience, that I would take my dog in this direction?
Yeah, so you just nailed it when you said besides obedience, because like everything starts with obedience, like no matter what. Like what is the initial step with every dog that we're going to work with is that foundation. And for me, it's heel, sit, stay, come when I call you. 4 things, pretty simple. But those 4 simple things are really simple until you start getting into them. It's just like anything else. Have you ever done vinyl siding? It's a weird question.
Seen it or put it on?
You ever put on vinyl siding?
No, but
okay.
Gosh, wouldn't that be a shocker if I said yeah?
Yeah, well, if you said, "Hey, I'm a vinyl contractor," I would have said, "Okay, never." Bad analogy, but so I've not done vinyl siding before either, right? But we've got a little cabin up in northern Wisconsin, and we put an addition on it. And 3 weekends ago, I put vinyl siding on it. And if you've ever done vinyl siding, and some of the people that are listening might have done vinyl siding before, and they'll go, yeah, it's very simple. Like putting vinyl siding on is not very complicated. I struggled with it for hours and hours and hours getting started. I fought the siding. I nailed it the wrong way. I wasn't cutting the right parts. There were little intricate things that a Google search, a couple of YouTube videos, all stuff that I should have done ahead of time, I didn't. And so I experimented with it, and I had a lot of struggles, and I was sweating and swearing, and it was not pretty. It was ugly. My wife came out at one point and said, "What is going on here?" And so, but here I am, and I'm fighting this idea of putting on vinyl siding. Now, someone who does vinyl siding for a living would have been able to do that job very simply, and they would have laughed at me and said, no, don't do that, do this, no, don't do that. And it's simple stuff, like it's not rocket science by any means, but it's a craft, it's a trade, it's a skill that's developed, and the more you do it, the more the better you're going to get. The better you're going to get, the easier it's going to be to do, and the more fun it's going to be. It's going to be faster. You're going to be more productive. So the idea of all this stuff when it comes to dogs, I say heel, sit, stay, come when I call you. That's simple. And if I say it that way, a lot of people that are listening are going, he's right. That is really simple. Those are very simple things. Until you start putting the vinyl siding on and realize it's a lot of little things. And so those foundational things, they're simple, but there's a lot of little parts to them. And if you start getting out of sequence with stuff, if you start having, I oftentimes use dog training, an analogy I use is like a chain, because everything's linked together, and links by themselves don't do us much good. But when you connect a lot of links together, now you've got a tool that you can use. And that's the dog's, all these training skills. So, but if you have a bunch of links here and a bunch of links here, but you can't get them connected, what good does it do you? And that's where it takes time. It takes making the errors. It takes seeing and reading and having an understanding of what it is, and then piecing that stuff back together. So that was the worst answer to the simplest question of what do you do when you start shed hunting, but...
No, it makes sense because we don't know what we don't know. Mm-hmm. It looks simple. When you start looking at, especially now that my dogs are involved in the hunt test world, and you see a dog go out and, he'll pick up a pretty difficult mark, and you're thinking, well, before I started all this, I thought, well, he's going out there, he's picking up the bird and coming back. But what you don't realize are the 10,000 steps.
For sure.
That make it look effortless.
Yeah.
And we talked about, you can either send your dog to a trainer to do this, or what becomes, I think, very intimidating for people, I know it did for me, to try and train them to do some of the initial steps yourself.
Sure.
And so I wasn't really sure, where do I turn? And one of the things that intrigued me about your series, I've watched it for some time now, is how much you attempt to empower the owner.
Sure. Or
the person doing the training. So we can talk to me a little bit about your videos and your methods, because I love that when we talked earlier before this, you part of your job and mission and your brand is to teach people how to train on their own, or put some of the power back into their hands.
Yeah. Yes. And so one of the things that, and I'll make no mistake in saying it, I won't, I'll be completely transparent. Like although I think there is potential value in some of the stuff that we put out there, for a professional trainer, my goal and objective is not to train professional trainers, or provide that insight, because quite honestly, I don't know that I'm fit for that. I am, people have said stuff about, talked about the idea of a professional trainer, and I guess professional, truly the definition means you get paid for it. That's how I read it. So yes, to a degree, I guess that you could throw me into that bucket. But what our goal is, and what my objective is with most of the stuff that we're sharing, is to try to help folks that are training their own dogs. I think the goal is, if there's an unwritten mission for us, it's to help folks enjoy their dogs more and get more enjoyment out of it, big picture and little picture. And then also the idea is to make it as enjoyable for the dogs as well. And I think that's a part that gets overlooked at times. I think what's really cool is these days, especially, I do think more and more people are into DIY type stuff. Like they like the idea of doing it themselves. They recognize that there's a lot of things out there and resources out there. I mean, I wasn't going to hire a vinyl contractor to come and do my siding. Maybe I should have.
Obviously not.
No, but I looked at
one anyway.
Right, exactly.
You can't. Good luck.
So, but I look at that and I go, so our goals are to try to do that. And the way we do it is by trying to share. I don't like the idea of people saying and I get messages like this and it's flattering and I'm really appreciative of those messages, but I get people that will send a message and say I followed your program to the T. I followed your system to this. And I'm quick to remind them that I don't think you should. I don't recommend you latch on. I love the idea of latching on and having loyalty to a belief or a philosophy. I think that's real important. I don't think you should hitch your wagons 100% to anybody or anything because none of us, I don't have a set program or a set system that I train in. I have some very general directions that we move and they're extremely consistent. I have some real strong beliefs in the approaches that I take when it comes to training a dog, and I don't waver on those much. But I also don't pretend to say that they're for everybody, and I certainly don't say those that don't do it that way or do it another way are wrong. Like that's not my place to say that. I think that
because we're not building widgets here.
Correct.
That's what I tell people. We have a living, breathing thing, animal, being, and it's not always cookie cutter.
Yeah,
it's
never is.
Not.
And they're all different. And the great trainers, I've been really lucky to be around, to pick brains of, to sponge off of. I had a great friend of mine here yesterday. He came and trained with me, and he's been doing it for 40 years probably. He's a real wealth of knowledge. Does things very similar. We do a lot of things very similar. We do a lot of things that are different. And we had a big conversation about it yesterday because we talked about other people in our network of friends that do things a little bit different. It's not wrong. It's not necessarily right. It's what works for the individual. And I think the key is for anybody who's watching this or following your page and seeing other trainers, I do too. Like I listen to, talk to, study. I'm going to be going to different classes and courses that people offer, not to replicate, because I don't think they fit what I do and how I do it and the dogs I do it with to a T. Because but I also think I should learn as much about it and understand as much about it as possible, because there may be parts and pieces that I can apply. And if that is the truth, it makes me better. And so, and I might not use it today. Like I'm training a dog right now. We do a lot of series, and we're doing a series right now on a dog named Callie. Beautiful little yellow dog. And she is fantastic. I've enjoyed the dogs I work with more in the last 5 years than I've ever enjoyed working with dogs before. Oh, 100%.
Very cool.
And it's because they're each different, and I've come to realize I'll approach each one differently. So if you watch the Callie series, it's different than the Bella series. It's different than the Spry series.
We just saw Live with Spry or Live with Spry.
Live with Spry, yeah.
Series. So it was Spry, a dog of yours?
Yeah, it's my daughter's dog actually, and she that one is and so that one is an interesting one too, because that was like Spry is 4 years old right now, and we trained her. Obviously it was my daughter's dog, so it lives with us as part of our family. And that was when Facebook Live started, and I had never done it before, and so we just accidentally or not intentionally recorded a Facebook Live with her, and from there we got a lot of really positive feedback of, man, I really liked you showing what you did with that 7-week-old puppy. So then we did it again when she was a few days later, and then it again, and then all of a sudden we started to develop this relationship and connection with the people that were watching it almost daily. I think there's 150 videos on our YouTube channel, and it's
very cool.
Yeah, it was over the course of about a year, I guess it was. And the thing about Live with Spry was it was real informal. I did it with my phone. I did it live with my phone.
That's great.
And it was very raw, and so since then we've continued the idea of the series. We've just upgraded the camera equipment is what it amounted to, but yeah, those are real valuable, and I think they're valuable because you'll see everything, not just highlight reel type stuff. And I think that's real important for people to understand that the mistakes that I make are mistakes that other people make, and if we pretend that we don't make mistakes because we are afraid to show that, then I'm doing a disservice to anybody who's trying to follow along and improve their training.
I think that's always a fear of mine too. If I ever run my own dogs, I'm gonna make a mistake and mess them up forever.
Yeah.
They'll be scarred for life. So
they're pretty resilient.
I get nervous.
Yeah.
I get nervous. So we've had some questions that have come in, and one of the questions I thought that we would start with, it was a really interesting one. And you said it's somebody that I see he's on here now. That's why I thought we would try it. This Malcolm
Sure.
Austin 8.
Yeah. Yep. I think he's from the UK.
Yeah.
Yep.
He wrote, has the whole conditioning video through the DogBone brand.
Sure. So it's a great question, and Malcolm and I have gotten to know each other really well over the last year, I would say, through DMs, like through messaging back and forth. I believe he's got a little Springer. I feel like this happens with a lot of folks where I truly get to know people and their dogs a little bit, although it sounds weird, it's through a computer, but
no, it makes sense.
Hold conditioning is, it's an alternative to a traditional force fetch or a trained retrieve. It's what I do. I don't force fetch.
Can you explain for those? I'm sure most of our audience knows what hold conditioning versus force, but for those who don't,
yeah, absolutely. And
can you give us a quick? Because also, if you haven't seen this video of Jeremy's, please watch it, because this is one of his most brilliant videos. I think I've watched it over and over.
I appreciate that. So I will, and I'll be honest with you. I don't think you are probably right. A lot of people probably don't know the difference. A lot of people refer it to me and go, "You're force fetch," and I'm quick to say, "No, it's not a force fetch." And I don't know that I don't want to get hung up on terminology, but I think it's really important for clarification and understanding. So hold conditioning, and this is something I learned. I didn't develop this. I learned this, and I know a lot of people that do different variations of it. In fact, I think a lot of folks that do force fetch traditional way do this as well, and they do it, I think, as a step leading into. So the difference, so for me, what hold conditioning is doing is it's a process in which we can remedy a lot of symptoms, and the symptoms can vary. The symptoms can mean blinking on dummies, meaning they run out for a retrieve, they go to pick it up, and they just leave it. They decide to breeze on. They sniff it, they bump it, they move on. So I call that blinking on a dummy. The idea of running off, picking something up and just not bringing it back. Run away, turn it into somewhat of a game of keep away, or just go explore what they want to explore. The idea of victory laps, that's a really common one where a dog doesn't want to come back, but he likes to do that. Yeah, it makes big loops around us, and it's frustrating. And
my dog used to do that.
Sure, dropping short, come to get to a certain distance and drop it. So chomping, being a little bit hard-mouthed on a bird. Those are all symptoms that can come up, and there's more that can come up that I think hold conditioning is usually a direction that I think helps us to alleviate or remedy the symptom. Now that's part of it. The process itself is formal, very formal, and I don't do it until they're done teething. I think it's for two reasons. Physically, they're just not ready for it. Mentally, they're probably not ready for it. It is a little bit more demanding from them from a thinking perspective. And I also think it's too much on a young dog, because ideally, the hold conditioning process I don't start until they're done teething. So let's just say it's going to be past 6 months. I still think they're a little young for
when all their adult teeth are in.
Correct. So they lose their puppy teeth, they got their adult teeth in. I think so from a sequencing standpoint, that's a minimum. I think that I would prefer to have it further away from that mark when they get those adult teeth in, because I'd like to build in a little bit of retrieving prior to it. And one of the things that I don't do when they're teething is retrieve. I just stop all retrieving because I think it creates problems. They've got a sore mouth. They don't want to pick something up. They got a sore mouth. They want to chew on stuff. So why shape a habit or form a habit that's undesirable when you could just avoid it altogether? I think that's a basic training idea that can be applied to everything, in particular the retrieve. So I'm for sure going to get beyond the teething. I'm going to get back into some retrieving prior to doing the actual hold conditioning. But when I get to the point, and usually it's because one of those symptoms comes up and I just can't go any further without having the frustration go away of the dog running off, or the idea of why I don't want to continually shape that behavior and make it harder to reverse. So when it becomes an issue, we go to hold conditioning. And the process is simple. It's almost like brainwashing. Like, it's almost like getting the dog to understand that once they pick something up and put it in their mouth, they can't spit it out until I tell them I use the word dead. I don't care what you use, but use a word and be consistent with it. But some type of a delivery. And so they can't physically let that thing go. And then the other thing is I want them to understand, where do I want them to let it go? I like a dog that delivers to the front. So I like a dog that comes to my front and delivers. It's all preference, and it can be shaped particular how you want it. But how we get there is by a process of them understanding it, very small baby steps, starting elevated, getting their feet off the ground. I use a wooden dowel, like a broom handle will work, or a dowel for hanging clothes. But I cut a short piece, and the only reason I use that dowel is because the first part of it can be not as pleasant for the dog. They might not like it. And so if they don't like it, I don't necessarily want to associate it with something that ultimately I want them to like. I don't care if they hate a wooden dowel. I don't want them to hate a dummy. I don't want them to hate a bird. I don't want them to hate a tennis ball. So I start with this object that really doesn't mean anything to them. I don't like dogs picking up sticks. So we're going to use a stick for this to just shape the idea of what it is. And then once they get past that and they're okay with it, then I'll start using objects that are good and things that I want them to actually pick up. But we go through this. It's a lengthy process. The video that we did, the formal video that we did, was actually a part of a series that we did of training videos, and we were going to include it in that training video. It became such a project in itself. It was an hour long, and I didn't want to add it to it was our shed training video, and I didn't want to add it to the shed training video because I thought it would take away from the shed training portion of it. And so what we decided at that point was we had filmed it with a film crew and produced it, and I said, well, we could just sell it as a separate product. Like, it's a hold conditioning video. And
because it's so complicated.
Yeah, and
this is relevant to you were saying. Leisha asks, do you not use the term dead before you hold condition, or do you use it with the early retrieve steps?
Leisha, your thought process is right on. So before we go to hold conditioning, so I always tell people, we talk about the formal part of hold conditioning, and it's a process and it starts at a certain point. I do not do a good job of making this point that I think hold conditioning starts way before formal hold conditioning. And this is where I think Leisha is talking. Hold conditioning starts with the first retrieve your puppy ever makes. Like, if we start going in, that's the idea of having an understanding of where we're going and a vision for the direction we're going to be going. And understanding that is valuable, so it helps to shape our behavior prior to it. Like, it allows us to understand the direction that we want to go. So the day the puppy makes a retrieve for you, whether it's by design or not, the puppy you might roll something out. I use a little balled up sock. I roll that out, and the puppy picks it up and brings it back to me. That moment, I'm encouraging the dog to hold on to it. I don't want to take it away from them. I don't want to steal it from them. I don't want them to think that there's a possessive thing here where I don't want to bring it back to them. I'm going to share it back and forth with them. I'm going to make it so that they don't feel threatened by the idea of bringing me this thing. In fact, they're really encouraged to bring it to me. Now, when they're really, really little, I don't necessarily think the need is there to give them a drop command or a dead command. I just get the object back out of their mouth and give it back to them. But at a certain point, I'm going to get that puppy bringing stuff back to me, and I will say to them, I'll start to tap that verbal cue in with my physical gesture. So if I take the thing out of their mouth, I'll say dead, but I'm not looking at it as that's like the training part. That's just imprinting it early, because that will be something that'll be valuable when I do get them up on top of the table and I start to formally do it in the whole process. So it's a really good question. Yeah, I do use the word dead earlier on, but I have a better understanding that it's not necessarily going to really influence or change the puppy because they don't know what that means. But I am going to use it. Why not? Like, what? There's no reason not to. You're gaining by imprinting it and putting it in the right spot.
Okay. So then I think you had said to me that you don't do force fetch.
I don't.
You do just hold. So why do you not do that? Like, what?
I don't know why. I don't know why you need to. I've never had to. I've never, So I look at retrievers. I think of retrievers, and I think of they're built to retrieve. Like that's their last name. They've been named that. So they retrieve. I've never had a dog that doesn't have some type of natural retrieve. Now it's not always the best, and some of them aren't always. Some are better than others naturally. And when I say retrieve, I mean the idea of going out and picking something up and then bringing it back and delivering it to me. To me, that's a retrieve. But you can break that into lots of parts. So the idea of going out is one thing. The idea of coming back is another. And then a lot of little details in the middle there as well. I think that for me, I don't want to associate any type of negative to something that I hope have been bred for years, centuries, to enjoy and want to do. I've never had a need for it. So I have no problem with those who force fetch. I don't. And so I think there are a lot of people out there that are uncomfortable with the process. I'm uncomfortable with the process. It's not logical to me. It doesn't make sense to me. Some people it makes perfect sense to, and that's fine. To me, there's no reason to put negative pressure and pain associated with this process with a dog. And in most, I don't think there's a need for it in most scenarios, if not all scenarios. I don't go to avoidance training often or ever. Now someone will be able to say, yeah, but we have another video out there that's a heel work video that's watched a lot. It gets a lot of views. I get a lot of grief on it because I make a correction to a dog's neck in the video. I correct it and it yips. I mean, I startle it. I get it surprised. And from that point on, I go a lot softer and a lot softer and a lot softer, and the dog responds really well. And the guy it was at a workshop, one of the training workshops that we did, and the guy who owns the dog, I've talked to him about it, and he said that was probably the most powerful moment I've ever had with that dog because it was the most responsive I've ever seen it. And I get people to say, you use avoidance training because look at that video. You're right. I use pressure. I use pressure and I use praise. But I also look at it and I go, I don't think I'm not trying to be on the extreme one way or the other. My goal is to try to get in the middle. I think that's where we need to be. That's where balance takes place. And so I'm trying to always strive for that and reach that with the dogs. So you won't see me do clicker training with treats. You won't see me do shock collars and force fetch. That doesn't mean they're wrong. It's just not the style I use.
That's interesting because there are. I feel the same way. I always joke. I play a dog trainer on TV.
Sure,
but
sure.
I think some dogs need a little bit. It's just like people. Some people they're easy. They're a little bit easier to train, or they're easier at learning or disciplining, or the same with dogs are no different. Some dogs are easier, some dogs are more stubborn. Some not that we train people, but so I think you have to tailor it to the dog.
For sure.
And that's so important that your dog. And you'll know your dog better than anybody else. So
sure.
There's no better place for your pup than with you. So Let's go on to this one, because one of the things that strike me about our conversation is just how logical and how easy you break things down, Jeremy. Because it's like these questions, although they can be very complex.
Sure.
But I think as somebody that understands dog psychology like you do, the answer is clear. Somebody asks, what drills to do if you're not near water and it's hot out, like midday activity drills, anywhere between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m.
Sure. So I think the answer there. So, and we're gonna be faced with that this weekend. We've got a handler's workshop here, and it's going to be 88 degrees on Saturday. And so our workshop goes. We start at 8. We have coffee and breakfast at 8. We start training at 9. We're done at 4. And what will happen typically this time of year, we're usually not that warm. What'll end up happening is on Friday when people come in, we're going to talk about it Friday night and say tomorrow's going to be really warm. Should we, as a group, decide instead of starting at 8 and then training at 9, should we have coffee at 5 and start training at 6? And then we'll take a midday break, and then we'll train instead of ending at 4, we'll end at 7, and we'll bump the afternoon session later. And the reason we're going to have to do that is because the question of what do I do during the midday when it's real hot, you don't do anything because you can't. It's not safe. And so
It's not safe.
if the one way to train in some warmer weather is water. I think that's as long as your water's cool. This is one thing that up here we have cold water. One of the things I did a seminar down in Missouri one summer, and I talked about, water work. We're going to go in the heat of the day. We'll go to water, and they said our water is 90 degrees hot. 90 degrees warm, and I said, well, we're not going there then. So there is no way to So the simple answer is, you don't train during those conditions that aren't, and a lot of people will ask that question, and I'm glad they asked it because they put some thought into it and they've been stumped by the idea of how do I overcome this challenge. And the reality is a really simple common sense thing is just you can't do it. And I think that more often than not, that can and should be the approach to questions when it comes to dogs. I think sometimes because they're dogs, we think we can't relate to them because I don't like the idea of humanization with dogs to a degree. But I also think common sense transfers regardless of species. So
right. It's not as if they would be immune to heat because they're dogs.
Exactly.
People say, they're animals or whatever. Well, they still they have temperatures. They're they're vulnerable to all types of things. They're living beings. I keep saying that.
Yeah, they're just like us. If they had air conditioning, they lay in the air conditioning just the same as we do. So there's no. It's the same. There are a lot of similarities, and I think shifting our mindset to not be so worried. And you had mentioned it before. You said something about I'm worried about wrecking them. They're very resilient, and B, I think we don't have to look at them so fragile. I think a lot of times we suffer from there's some terminology out there that I've heard people talk about it. It's this paralysis because you don't know. And I think sometimes making the mistake is better than nothing at all. And as long as you learn from the mistake, I make mistakes all the time. If you watch any of our YouTube stuff, you'll see it. I make a lot of mistakes, not intentional. I don't do it on purpose, but I recognize that those mistakes are such good opportunities for me to get better. They're always the way that I can improve, but you got to recognize them.
Absolutely. Let's see. Somebody had something here that I liked, but that goes over to this one because this was once again another one of those. Well, it combines with I'm not talking about the obvious because we don't want to I don't want to call anybody out and say, well, this is kind of obvious answer because it's not.
Sure. There's a reason they asked.
Yeah, and plus because basic training, as you had just mentioned, it is complicated. Those 4 different skill sets and commands, although they're very simple, they're actually, they're complex. They can become very complex when teaching. Somebody wants to know, Eat, Drink, Hunt, Texas, how to get your older dog to honor your new dog while retrieving.
Sure. Yeah, this one is real simple. It doesn't matter. The idea of plugging, I think the question is driven around the idea of you got a new dog, how do you get the old dog to honor them? It doesn't matter if it's a new dog or if it's the neighbor's dog or it's a dog they've been hunting with forever. Honoring another dog should not be predicated on the other dog. It's on the dog that you need to have honor. So it goes back to this idea of simply creating the habits that are desirable in the older dog, like steadiness, patience, the ability to wait quietly and be kind of respectful of everyone around him, not just the new dog. I think training dogs together is a question that comes up a lot, and you cannot do it. Like, it's necessary. If you're going to work with other dogs, it's one of the biggest problems people have when they come to workshops is their dog never does this at home. They're embarrassed by it because they never do this. They always behave better. It's because you don't train in a group of 15 other dogs. And that variable creates a lot of issues. And so the idea of you have to work in groups with other dogs to be able to work in groups with other dogs. But you cannot do it without taking care of the number one dog first. It needs to be perfect by itself with no distractions before you can start adding layers of distraction. And group work is a layer of distraction. It's a big one. It's a complicated one. And so it's a baby step incremental process to get to it and get into it and then get beyond it. And so, the answer for that particular person is you got to work on the old dog. It has nothing to do with the young dog.
Right. And I think for whatever reason, I think that just because I don't think somebody should throw in the towel just because their old dog doesn't have or hasn't mastered that skill set.
Oh my gosh, no.
Or that dog is, they haven't been able to acquire the skill set, so we're just, throw them into training or do whatever.
No,
Take your time on each dog.
What I think, and the beauty of that for that person is, so when they say new dog, I think we're both assuming younger dog. They brought a new dog in; it's a younger dog. So that's a great way to double up on your training. Like you should work on the same skills. It's just you got to work them separately. So you're gonna have, if you bring in a new dog, it's easy to understand. I've got some work to do here. If you've got an older dog, it's easy to think, well, they've got what they've got. They can continue to improve. So what this person needs to do is this person needs to just do double the work, twice the work, with one time with one dog and one time with the other, and develop them both together. You know how much easier it is to develop? It's this idea of continuity. Like there's a common question that comes up is, dog listens to me really well, but not my wife and kids, or vice versa. It could be it totally could be the opposite.
Right here.
But so we hear that a lot, and my answer to that is always, consistency is key in training. And you know that as an individual. You have to be consistent in order to form a habit. That same consistency needs to be consistent throughout your house. So like if dogs don't live by separate sets of rules based on who the handler is, they learn a skill set or behavior expected, and then the people need to replicate it. And that's where that consistency doubles up. Like there's got to be consistency throughout. So if you're developing a product that you want with that young dog, now is a perfect time to start shaping it with your older dog as well, and work them individually, get them both good, and bring them up together. And that young dog may be just what you needed to inspire you to go back to work with the old dog.
Yeah. I like that a lot, because sometimes it gets stale, in training.
Absolutely.
This was interesting. I have a puppy and a gun dog program to hunt. I have an almost older dog who isn't. Should I let them play together and then take the train one solo to run drills? So I think what he's saying, because one is going route A, the other's route B, are they allowed to mix together?
Yeah, so I think they can. I think there's going to be I believe really strongly in cultural impacts. Like I think the cultural impacts that we put kids into really develops them into adults. I think the same is true with dogs. And I think that I love my dogs, young dogs. I love my dogs to be around and involved with other dogs. I think it's a socialization thing. It's really healthy for them. I think but I also think it depends on the crowd. Like my kid, we've got a mixed bag of kids here. I've got a 2-year-old little daughter, an 11-year-old daughter, and a 19-year-old son. So we're really spread out. And my 19-year-old son, I can speak off of experience because he's grown up to be a damn good kid. I mean, I'm really proud of him. He's going to college right now, and he's just a really good kid. And I think that as I look back on the last 19 years, I see the results. He's an adult. He's a young man, and I see what he embodies today. And I can tell you 100% it's a reflection of what he's been around. I mean, I'm proud of that. I'm not bragging about it. I'm proud of it. It has to do with his impacts of his mother, probably as much or more than his dad. But I see so many similarities to aunts and uncles. I see friends. I see parents of friends in him. I see all these behavioral traits of his and in what I'm going to call a moral compass. He's got it. He's got it built on those. He's got it built on who he's been around. I think dogs are the same way. Now I've got a little one. I've got a 2-year-old, and she just moved into this big kids daycare class or whatever. And within a week of being in that class, she came home and she's biting people. And I'm going, where did this come from? Cultural impact. There's a kid in that class that bites kids. And all of a sudden she's shaping and forming these habits. And I go, here's a perfect example of when we have these dogs working in groups. Yesterday we had 6 dogs working together, me and my buddy that came up with his dogs. The oldest one, I had a couple of my older ones with that are 5 years old. And then 4 out of the 6 were under 16 months old. So pretty young dogs. And some were a little squirrelier than others. And some required more control and more focus and attention. The old ones laid there and they were just, you didn't even know they were there. And I go, so should dogs, those young dogs, be around those older dogs in those groups? Absolutely, because look at the role model they're getting. They're not being spun up. They're not. So I like the idea, but if you have a dog that is untrained as far as behavioral, or maybe trained but not desirably, I want to keep my young dog that I'm looking to shape in a different direction. I'll keep it away from that because I'll keep it away from it until they can have such strong habits formed that are desirable that distraction of that other dog do not erode the behavior that I'm looking for. So I love place training with dogs, not necessarily for a lot of the skill development stuff, but I like it as simply a skill in itself. I'm turning around, I've got 2 of them on place right now behind me, and that is something where I like that's a place where it allows them a little bit of security and some perimeter. And I'll put a young dog that's going to struggle to focus on a place, and then the dog that maybe is a little bit more rambunctious and runs around and untrained, that one can do what it wants, but my dog is not going to be allowed to free roam and interact with it. My dog can experience it and watch it and understand that I'm not allowed to do that.
And I always say they become a product of their environment.
For sure.
So, if you ever watch that's their pack animals.
For sure.
That's everybody, their pack animal. Well, you ever watched, one dog starts digging in the garbage, the second one, the third one.
Sure.
They're a product of their environment.
Yeah,
so
without
it's
question.
So important to have consistency. This one I thought was interesting. I know I'm trying to be mindful of the time, but these are question I have not had before, and I liked it because it has to do with, once again, I would love to, we'll do in the future, hopefully get into the whole concept behind upland training, because that's something, we're all waterfowl here, but we have plenty of upland followers. And talked about best way to get a pointer to retrieve. Sure. And this always fascinates me because I see pointers going after, I see pointers doing duck work. Yeah. But I see more Labradors going, doing bird upland hunting than the other way around. So,
yeah. So So, and I'll put this out there too, to be real clear. So I have my first deposit on an English setter. I'm going to be getting here in the next, hopefully this summer yet, but it's not looking like that. It might be next summer. But I'm going to be bringing in a pointing breed, and part of it is because of my own personal desire to have one, because of my hunting style and what I like to hunt. I really love hunting grouse and woodcock, and so we're going to be getting a dog for that purpose, but also because I've never trained a pointing dog, and I think it will help me greatly better understand dog training in general, not just retriever training. So the question, but I've worked with some pointing dogs. We've had pointing dogs come to our workshops, and so I've been around them enough, not to call myself a pointing dog trainer, but I've been able to see them, and I got news for you. A dog's a dog. I don't, whether it's a pointing dog, whether it's a flushing dog, whether it's a tracking dog. Been really lucky to get involved with some real serious tracking people, whether it be specialty breeds, hounds, and different dogs that are specializing in that style of hunt, or I've just been around, and I love it because I do think it allows me to learn a lot more about dogs in general. And the one thing that I found is it is difficult in life to fit round pegs into square holes. Like, there's a reason that it just doesn't. There are certain things that make things easier. Retrievers retrieve, pointers point. And so, did they have a specific breed, or did you just say a pointer when he asked that question? So I've trained beagles, and I've had a lot of fun with beagles. I hunt rabbits over them, of friends that have them, and love the dog. Not necessarily want to own any, but not right now anyway. But I've seen some, and I think this can be another way of doing this is go down to the beach this summer or go to the dog park and watch people throw frisbees, watch people throw tennis balls. Tennis balls are probably the best secret tool that's not a secret. Like, it's such a powerful thing for dogs, and I don't know why, but most dogs love tennis balls.
I know.
And
They love tennis balls.
and so and when you start thinking about retrieving, I think sometimes we think it needs to be a formal dummy, or it needs to be a bird, or it needs to be an antler. And a retrieve is, they picked up the pop bottle that was in the ditch and brought it back to you. That's a retrieve. And so retrieving is retrieving. And I think what I would do with a dog in the scenario of maybe not a strong, natural, instinctive retrieve. Oh, I lost you there for a second. Are you back?
Wait, you cut up. There.
Okay. So
Yeah,
if they're not a real strong natural retrieve, I would try a few things. Make it into a fun game with a tennis ball. And that doesn't mean asking for formal steadiness. That doesn't mean requiring a nice delivery. Just get one step of it. Get one part of the retrieve. Throw a tennis ball and let natural predator-prey take place where they chase it. And hopefully scoop it up because they caught it. And then really make them think like they saved the world by doing it. Really get excited. I like to get down and welcome them back to me. Instead of standing up and asking for this delivery, get right down on the ground and let them bring it right back to you. Another thing I think you could try is if your dog swims. Water is a really great place to connect retrieve because it eliminates the need for the dog to pick it up and carry it. If you throw something out in the water, a tennis ball, let's say, and you don't have to throw it 30 yards, throw it 5 feet and get the dog just enticed enough to go out and have to swim and grab a hold of it. And then they turn around because where else are they going to go? They're not going to run off. They can't go anywhere. They're going to turn and they're going to come back to shore, which gives you a nice chance to position yourself to receive them. Go right in the water yourself. Get it to the point where they don't even have to come out of the water. Go into the water.
That's what I do.
And you start shaping behavior. The behavior is go out and pick that thing up and then swim it back to mom or dad. And so I think there's different ways to start. You trick them into it almost by making it fun. You trick them into the idea of they can't help but predator-prey chase something. So don't ask them to be steady. Just get them to run. And that's where I see like people in the parks that are not dog trainers by any means, and I can tell you that because I watched them heel up. The dog dragged them to the dog. They're not trainers, but they'll go. Well, no. But they'll go into that park and they'll start throwing that Frisbee, and that dog runs out and brings it back. And runs out and brings it back. And there's a lot of retriever people that can't get their retrievers to retrieve that well. And I think it's because we take it too serious and are too formal.
Yeah.
Have it be fun first.
Yeah, and don't overdo it. I always like to say, too, shorten the distance.
Absolutely.
You know, and don't try for 100 yards. Just
simplify.
Take this. You know, there's one more that I also. This one, because a lot of people are training in water right now, obviously, but my dog, this is very specific, but I like this question. My dog drops and shakes the bumper right out.
Sure.
Into the water. So how do I solve that? So I think it's talking about something along these lines.
Yeah.
Retreat and then drops the bumper.
Sure.
Doesn't bring it all the way back.
That's super common, because the thing is when the dog comes out of the water, that's what they're going to do is shake. They want to shake first, and so they're going to spit the dummy. So what I try to do is, and I think there'd be, this is the thing where there's just no like real simple black and white answers. Like I have questions back for this person. I go, well, how old is the dog? Like, is it a little puppy? Is it an older dog? If it's an older dog and it's been doing this for 3 or 4 years, I would treat that a little bit differently than if it was a puppy and just starting to swim. But one of the things that you can do is, first off, don't let the habit form in the first place, if possible. So if you've got the little puppy, get to the water's edge and intercept that pup before it gets out of the water and needs to shake, and start forming that habit of, when I come out, I hold on to it. And again, this is that idea of hold conditioning ultimately is a fix for this. But I think prior to doing hold conditioning, you should be shaping this behavior. So when they're little and they start swimming and they're 4 months old, let's say, and they're not hold conditioned, they go out and they pick something up and they bring it back to shore. Meet them at the water's edge. And don't let them start spitting and shaking and forming that habit. And then what I can do is just take a step back and have them come to the edge. And again, encourage them, hold, and get underneath them. And I think people always want to pet their dogs on the top of the head to praise them. Mm-hmm. If they have something in their mouth, never pet the top of their head. Because when you pet the top of the head goes down. When the head goes down, all they have to do is open the mouth and the object falls. Instead, get in a habit of petting them up from the underside. So I'll get underneath their chest and I'll come back up under their chin, and I'll pray. They're getting the same praise, and I'm telling them how good they are. And all I'm doing is every time I pet them, I'm reassuring and confirming the idea of put my chin up, and when my chin is up, even if they open their mouth, it doesn't fall out. So we're shaping that hold. And so we can start doing that right from the start. But
wow, that's interesting.
As they get older, that dog, we're going to remind it when it gets to that water, when it gets to start to come out, hold, and then they're going to look at you and they're going to go back to that idea of, oh yeah, I'm supposed to hang on to this. And then when I take it from them, I always say, okay, and now that gives them the opportunity to shake off. And so it's this timing thing.
Very cool. I mean, I once again, one of the most important and obvious, I don't want to say obvious, but the most important thing that falls out from our conversations is that it takes time.
For sure.
And you have to have patience. I'm listening. And obviously, the most success, the longer, the more patient, the more success I think you'll have with your dog. Don't rush it.
It's the most underrated skill a trainer can have, in my opinion, is patience. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of training dogs to me is it transfers to life. Like I pray every morning when I get up for patience. It's part of my routine because I know I need it. And that's not just with dogs. That's with like everything that's going on. And
especially now.
Yeah, for sure. And that's not going to change. We're always going to be needing, patience will never hurt us. It'll only help. Nope. And so with the dogs, the beauty of it, and again, kind of full circle comes back to when we started talking and when we talked prior to coming on here, my goal is to help the person that's training their own dog. And one of the best things that we have going for us, in that, myself included, I train clients' dogs, but I train them. I almost lost you.
Sorry about that.
I train a client's dog without a time frame. There is no window of we're going to do this by this time or not. There is no like, you send them for me for this time, for this amount of time. I don't do it that way, and it's intentional, and it's a really poor business model if you're going to train dogs. Like, that's not our business. Our business is helping others train their dogs and hopefully providing them support, whether it be product stuff or information. But the one thing that I've got going for me that I wouldn't have if I was a kennel that needed to train a number of dogs, so many through the door through the year, the thing that I have going for me, which I think is invaluable, is the idea that and this is the person that's listening, training their own dog, there is no time restriction or limitation to this. You have as much time as is necessary to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And I actually think that when you start to take that pressure off of yourself, a couple things happen. First off, you become a lot more productive. It's really it sounds backwards, but I always tell people the best way to speed things up in training is to slow them down. It's the best way. And I think that when we embrace that mentality, it becomes more enjoyable. And when something becomes more enjoyable, I do it more often. And when I do it more often, I get better at it. And so it's a real vicious circle in a good way. But what it does is it snowballs, and it allows us to find more success. And I again, this is where I go, I don't know that that's the mentality that a professional trainer that's got a kennel of 30 dogs can take. I get it. It doesn't work that way. I'm not, that's not my situation. And I think that's not the situation that most people training their own dog face. And I think we have to realize, I hope that we're able to bring a little light to that idea of, hey, I'm not in a rush, and I don't think you should be either. And when that happens, I think it allows for a lot of real positive things to take place.
Yeah, I think people need to be cognizant of the fact that it's your own pace and your own style, and not compare yourself to the dog next door.
Absolutely.
We see in this world of social media, it applies. I mean, our page too, we post the biggest, the best,
Sure.
We're always trying, but recognize that, those are great examples.
Sure.
When you be the best that you can be, and do it, on your time and your dog's time. Don't try to shove them through the system.
Yeah. It's unfair to the dog, and it's unfair to the person. I think that you are exactly right. Like, the last thing I worry about, so when it comes to pace of training and scheduling of training and the idea of sequencing, a lot of folks want that. We want that. We're structured on time. Our lives are driven by time. Dogs don't care about time. They just don't. And so
that's so true. They don't. How would they know?
No, and so I really think that that's just an important thing to understand. And one of the things, there's a lot of trainers that I look up to, and have taken a lot from over the years, and will continue to as time goes on. But one of the simplest answers I got was from a trainer that I was training a dog that was out of his lines, and I was really having fun with it, and things were going really well, and I was using him as a resource and sharing stuff back and forth, and one of the things he said to me was, why you're having the success you're having right now? And I didn't, and I said, no, I had my ideas, and the dog's real natural, and all this stuff. And he said, it's because you're having fun. And he said if you are having fun with it, that's when you're going to see progress. And I have had times in my life training where I dreaded having to get up and go work with this dog. And it was and the reality was because I was putting some really unfair pressures on myself and that dog, and it didn't work very well. It just didn't work well for me.
Can't. Well, we could talk forever, and I'm telling you, you watch your series. I think it applies to life itself. It sounds kind of. I'm telling you out there, it does.
Well, thank you for saying that. I think. Yeah. I honestly think that. I think there's so many things. I've learned so many things. I've become so much better at and I've got a hell of a long ways to go I have so far to go when it comes to being a better dad, a better husband, a better son, a better everything I'm doing, whether I'm coaching kids in sport, I don't care what it is. There's so much there. I feel like I have so much more to learn and so much more improvement to make. And I think that dog training for me is one of my greatest passions. It's one of the things I enjoy the most. It's taught me so much about all the other parts. And that's why I owe so much to training dogs. That's why I owe so much to the dogs. Like that. And when we start looking at it that way, our mindset is different. And it's about perspective. We talk a lot about it here around our business and our culture and our family. And I call it family because it's both blood and our business. That's our family. And yep. And the people that we connect with, Malcolm. I mean, Malcolm's been messaging. He's part of our family. And so when I look at that, I go, to me, that's the whole point of it, is to try to figure out how to improve that, get better at it. It's necessary. It's something that we need to do, and it's fun to do it. So I thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. So I want everyone to go to, it's the dogbonehunter.com, check out your products, grab on some of those videos and your training products, go to your YouTube channel. I mean, it's great. It's great stuff.
I appreciate it. Yeah. I encourage people. I really encourage people, if you have an interest, go to YouTube is probably a really good spot to start. Like, it's free. Like, you get what you pay for, so don't complain that it's not, but it's free. And what it's going to do is it's going to give you a better understanding of what, our website is great. And I really appreciate not only supporting our business, but small businesses in general. Like, I just think it's a really important time to do that. And so I'm so grateful and thankful for those that do it. But I also think that, you don't have to buy our stuff to fulfill us. Like, if we can help you with your dog, we have a podcast, we have the YouTube, like, that's all stuff that's free. And the idea of it is, if we can help, we just want to help. And that's our goal. It's our objective.
That's what ours is too. So we're free.
Absolutely.
And that's why we're honest brokers. I always say we're an honest broker. We owe it to the dog.
Sure.
That's why we try to stay that way as long as we can.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate it, Diane. Thanks for having me on.